They say every king has a blind spot. Apollo Sinclair's was simple. He only saw what glittered. From the 95th floor of Sinclair Tower, Manhattan spread beneath him like a kingdom of glass and ambition. He collected women the way other men collected art. Beautiful, expensive, temporary. But somewhere in the shadows of his empire, a woman he'd never noticed was about to do something that would bring him to his knees, not with beauty, not with seduction, but with something far more dangerous, the truth. This is the story of a man who had everything, and the invisible woman who showed him he had nothing at all. The city never slept, and neither did Sarah Mitchell. At 11:47 on a Wednesday night, while most of Manhattan dreamed, Sarah sat in her small cubicle on the 72nd floor of Sinclair Tower, her dark fingers flying across 3 keyboards simultaneously. The glow of 6 monitors illuminated her face, a beautiful face that no one had looked at twice in the 3 years she'd worked here. She wore her invisibility like armor. Simple black clothes, hair pulled back in a tight bun, glasses that hid more than they revealed. She preferred it that way. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city glittered like scattered diamonds on black velvet. But Sarah wasn't looking at the view. She was looking at numbers, thousands of them, cascading down her screens in patterns that would look like chaos to anyone else. To her, they told stories. Stories of money flowing through the company like blood through veins. Stories of decisions made in boardrooms she'd never entered. Stories of a man she'd never met, but knew better than he knew himself. Apollo Sinclair. The name alone commanded attention. The man commanded empires. Sarah had seen him exactly 4 times in 3 years. Each time from a distance that felt like looking at a star, bright, untouchable, impossibly far away. The first time she'd been leaving the building at 7 in the morning after her night shift. He was arriving in a car that probably cost more than her entire childhood home. Tall, devastatingly handsome, with skin the color of warm bronze and eyes that seemed to see through walls, but not through her. She'd held the elevator door for him, and he'd walked past as if she were furniture. The second time, she'd been in the cafeteria during her break. He'd swept through with a woman who looked like she'd stepped off a runway in Milan, all legs and cheekbones and practiced laughter. Sarah had watched them over the rim of her coffee cup, observing the way he touched the woman's lower back with practiced ease, the way his smile never quite reached his eyes. The third time, she'd been working late in the conference room, organizing files that the day shift analysts had abandoned in chaos. He'd walked past the glass wall with another woman, this one blonde where the last had been brunette, but wearing the same expression of temporary possession. Sarah had frozen, hoping her stillness would keep her invisible. It had worked. The fourth time was 2 weeks ago. She'd been in the elevator heading down to the data archives in the basement. The doors had opened on the 95th floor, his floor, the executive penthouse that most employees only heard about in whispers. He'd stepped in with a man in an expensive suit, deep in conversation about a merger with a telecommunications company in Singapore. Sarah had pressed herself into the corner, making herself small. They'd talked for 43 floors as if she didn't exist, but she'd listened. And what she'd heard had kept her awake for 7 nights straight. Now staring at her screens, Sarah's fingers paused over the keyboard. The numbers didn't lie. They never lied. And what they were telling her was that Apollo Sinclair was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. The Singapore deal, $600 million. A partnership that looked golden on paper but was built on foundations of sand and deception. She'd traced the money backward, through shell companies and offshore accounts, through layers of obfuscation that were meant to hide the truth. Sinclair's potential partner was drowning in debt and using Apollo's investment to pay off loan sharks in 3 countries. In 48 hours, Apollo would sign the contract. In 90 days, he'd lose everything. Sarah leaned back in her chair, rubbing her tired eyes. This wasn't her job. Her job was data analysis for the marketing department, tracking consumer trends, predicting market shifts, creating reports that middle managers would skim and forget. Her job was to be invisible, collect her paycheck, and stay under every radar that had ever tracked her. Getting involved with Apollo Sinclair's business was dangerous. Getting noticed was dangerous. Everything she'd built in the past 3 years, the quiet life, the anonymous existence, the careful distance from anything that might shine a spotlight on her past, all of it could crumble if she stepped into the light. But $600 million, hundreds of jobs, the company that, despite everything, had given her a chance when no one else would. And somewhere beneath all the practical calculations, something else. Something she didn't want to name. A curiosity about the man who walked through the world as if it owed him applause. A wonder about what it would feel like to be seen by someone who seemed to see everything except what mattered. Sarah made her decision at 12:31 in the morning. She pulled up a blank document and began to type. Not an email that could be traced, not a message through the company system that would have her digital fingerprints all over it. Instead, she crafted a letter, old-fashioned, anonymous. Elegant, Mr. Sinclair, you're about to lose everything. The Singapore telecommunications deal is a trap. Li Wei Chen isn't a partner. He's a desperate man using your money to pay his debts to criminal organizations in Jakarta, Hong Kong, and Seoul. The company you're buying is worth nothing. The technology you're investing in doesn't exist, and the contracts you're signing will make you legally liable for his fraud. Check the following account numbers. Trace the money backward. You have 48 hours. Someone who sees what you don't. She listed 12 account numbers, each one a breadcrumb that would lead Apollo's forensic accountants straight to the truth. Then she printed the letter on paper without watermarks, using a printer in a department 3 floors below hers, at an hour when security cameras in that hallway were scheduled for maintenance. At 2:15 in the morning, Sarah rode the elevator to the 95th floor. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd never been here before, not officially. The executive level was a different world. Where her floor was all practical cubicles and fluorescent lights, this was all dark wood, soft lighting, and art that probably cost more than her annual salary. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that looked like it belonged in a 5-star hotel. Marble floors, a reception desk carved from a single piece of mahogany. And beyond it, floor-to-ceiling glass walls that offered a view of Manhattan that made Sarah's breath catch despite her nervousness. She moved quickly, her soft-soled shoes silent on the marble. Apollo's office was at the end of the hallway. She knew from the building directory. The door was solid oak with his name engraved on a platinum plate. She'd imagined this door 100 times, wondering what lay beyond it. But she wasn't here to satisfy her curiosity. Sarah slid the letter under the door. The white envelope looked stark against the dark wood, like a surrender flag on a battlefield. She stood there for just a moment, her hand pressed against the door, feeling the cool, solid wood beneath her palm. What was he doing right now? Sleeping in some penthouse apartment with a view even better than this one? Or lying awake with one of his conquests, already planning his escape before sunrise? Did men like Apollo Sinclair ever lie awake wondering if they were making mistakes? Or did they sleep the peaceful sleep of people who believed the world would always bend to their will? Sarah pulled her hand back and turned away. She was back at her desk by 2:45, her heart still racing, her hands trembling slightly as she resumed her work. The screens, full of numbers, seemed to pulse with accusation. "What have you done?" they seemed to ask. "What chain of events have you set in motion?" She didn't know. She only knew that she couldn't watch a man, even one who didn't know she existed, walk blindly off a cliff. The rest of the night passed in a blur of work and worry. Sarah forced herself to focus on her regular tasks, building the consumer trend report that was due Friday, analyzing shopping patterns, predicting the next wave of fashion preferences that would sweep through the demographic that bought Sinclair products. But part of her mind was 95 floors above, imagining that white envelope lying on dark wood, waiting to be discovered. At 6:30 in the morning, as dawn began to paint the sky in shades of gold and pink, Sarah saved her work, logged out of her systems, and gathered her things. The night shift was ending. The day shift would arrive in an hour, filling the building with noise and purpose, and the bustling energy of people who existed in the light. She rode the elevator down alone, watching the floor numbers descend. 72, 68, 53, 41. The building emptying beneath her, carrying her back to ground level, back to the street, back to her small apartment in Brooklyn where she could finally sleep. As she stepped out into the early morning air, Sarah paused and looked up at Sinclair Tower. 95 floors of glass and steel reaching toward a sky that was turning from black to blue. Somewhere up there, on the very top floor, was a man who would find an envelope this morning. A man who would read words written by someone he'd never seen, a man whose life was about to change, even if he didn't know it yet. Sarah Mitchell pulled her coat tighter and walked toward the subway. She told herself she'd done the right thing. She told herself it didn't matter what happened next. She told herself she could go back to being invisible, that this one moment of stepping forward wouldn't change anything. She told herself a lot of things as she disappeared into the morning crowd. But somewhere in her chest, beneath the careful armor of indifference, her heart knew the truth. Once you save someone's life, even anonymously, you become connected to them in ways that can't be undone. She'd reached out from the shadows to touch Apollo Sinclair's world, and the shadows never let you go that easily. On the 95th floor of Sinclair Tower, a white envelope lay waiting under an oak door. Inside it, words that would change everything. Outside the windows, Manhattan woke up to a new day, unaware that somewhere in its steel canyons, two lives had just begun orbiting each other. One lived in spotlights and boardrooms, the other in shadows and silence. But gravity doesn't care about light or darkness. It only cares about mass, and the force pulling them together had just become inevitable. Apollo Sinclair found the envelope at 7:23 in the morning. He'd been at the office since 5:30, unable to sleep after another night that had ended the way they all ended lately. Empty. The woman from last night, Clarissa, had left his penthouse apartment at midnight, her practiced smile not quite hiding her disappointment that he hadn't asked her to stay. He never asked them to stay. He'd lain awake in his king-size bed with its 1,000 thread-count sheets, staring at the ceiling, feeling the familiar restlessness that no amount of champagne or conquest seemed to cure anymore. At some point, restlessness had turned to anxiety about the Singapore deal, and anxiety had driven him to shower, dress, and head to the office before dawn. Now, unlocking his office door, he nearly stepped on the white envelope. Apollo picked it up, frowning. His assistant didn't arrive until 8. Security didn't deliver mail to individual offices, and no one, absolutely no one, had access to the 95th floor without clearance that took weeks to obtain. He carried the envelope to his desk, dropping his briefcase on the leather chair that had cost more than most people's cars. His office was a statement of power, floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls offering a 360-degree view of Manhattan, modern art worth millions, a bar stocked with liquor older than some of his employees, and a desk made from reclaimed wood from a 19th-century sailing ship. Everything in this room told a story of conquest, of winning, of being untouchable. Apollo opened the envelope. 5 minutes later, he was on the phone with his head of security. I want to know who was on the 95th floor between midnight and 6 this morning. Every person, every movement. Pull the security footage from every camera in this building. Mr. Sinclair, the executive floor is locked after... I don't care what's locked. Someone was here. Find them. 10 minutes after that, he was on the phone with his chief financial officer. Marcus, I need you to trace some account numbers. Now. Before you have coffee, before you talk to anyone else. This is priority one. By noon, Apollo's office looked like a war room. His CFO, his head of legal, 2 forensic accountants, and his chief of security crowded around the conference table, their faces grave. Marcus Chen, the CFO who'd been with Apollo since the beginning, spoke first. Whoever sent you this letter just saved your ass. Li Wei Chen is drowning. The account trails lead to loan sharks in 3 countries. The telecommunications company is a shell. The technology doesn't exist. If you'd signed that contract... How did we miss this? Apollo's voice was quiet, dangerously quiet. His legal team shifted uncomfortably. The lead attorney, Patricia Morrison, cleared her throat. Their documentation was impeccable. Someone worked very hard to make this look legitimate. Our due diligence found nothing because there was nothing to find in the surface layers. Whoever wrote this letter went 7 layers deep into offshore accounts. That's not normal due diligence. That's... She paused, searching for words. That's obsessive, brilliant, and way beyond what any of our analysts would do for a routine deal check. Apollo turned to his head of security. James? James Rodriguez, former Secret Service, looked frustrated. The security footage shows nothing. There's a scheduled maintenance window for the hallway cameras between 2 and 2:30 every Wednesday morning. Whoever delivered this knew our security schedule. Inside job, Marcus muttered. But who? Patricia asked. Who in this company has both the financial forensic skills to trace money through 7 layers of international shell companies and knows our building security schedules well enough to exploit them? Apollo was staring at the letter, reading it for the 20th time. The handwriting was elegant, confident, precise, someone who sees what you don't. Not a threat, not a boast, just a statement of fact that somehow cut deeper than any insult. Pull up everyone who has financial analysis skills, he said quietly. Cross-reference with everyone who works night shifts. I want a list on my desk by end of day. They scattered like birds, startled by a gunshot. Apollo stood alone in his office, holding the letter, feeling something he hadn't felt in years. Humility. Someone in his own building had seen a threat he'd missed. Someone had saved him from a mistake that would have destroyed everything he'd built. Someone who could have used that information for blackmail or corporate espionage or any number of profitable schemes. Instead, they'd warned him, anonymously, asking nothing in return. Who does that? He wondered. Who has power and chooses not to use it? Sarah knew the moment the investigation started. She felt it the way animals feel earthquakes before they happen. A shift in the air, a change in pressure, an instinct that whispered danger. Thursday morning, her supervisor, a middle manager named Dennis, who usually ignored the night shift entirely, appeared at her cubicle at 11:15 at night. Dennis never came in after 6. Sarah, right? He looked uncomfortable, consulting a tablet. Sarah Mitchell, data analyst, level 3, 3 years with the company. Yes. She kept her voice neutral, her expression pleasantly blank. Mr. Sinclair's office is conducting a routine review of personnel with certain skill sets. I need to ask you some questions. Sarah's heart slammed against her ribs, but her hands remained steady on her keyboard. Of course. Your background is in advanced financial analysis. My degree is in applied mathematics with a focus on statistical modeling. I do consumer trend analysis for the marketing department. But you could analyze financial data, corporate accounts. I could analyze anything numerical, I suppose, but that's not my job function. Dennis nodded, making notes. Were you in the building Tuesday night, 2 days ago? I work Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. So yes. Did you go to any floors other than your own? Sarah met his eyes calmly. I went to the cafeteria for coffee around 2, and down to the archives in the basement around 4 to retrieve some historical data files. Why? Just routine, Dennis said, clearly lying. Did you see anything unusual? Anyone who shouldn't be here? No. The night shift is usually quiet. After he left, Sarah sat very still for exactly 3 minutes, controlling her breathing, analyzing the risk. They were looking. Of course they were looking. Apollo Sinclair didn't get to where he was by accepting anonymous favors without demanding answers. But they wouldn't find her. She'd been careful. The letter had no fingerprints. She'd worn gloves. The printer she'd used was in a department that handled thousands of print jobs daily. The paper was standard office stock. And the security cameras had been blind at exactly the right moment. Unless someone had seen her, unless some janitor or late-working executive had spotted her on the 95th floor. Sarah forced herself back to work. Fear was useless. Action was everything. She would do her job, keep her head down, and wait for the investigation to pass over her like a storm over a stone. But Friday brought new complications. At 1:30 in the morning, Sarah was in conference room C on the 72nd floor, organizing data files that the day shift had abandoned in chaos. She preferred working here sometimes. The conference room had a view of the city that her cubicle lacked, and the solitude helped her think. She was deep in thought, arranging papers into neat stacks, when the door opened. Sarah's head snapped up. Apollo Sinclair stood in the doorway. For one frozen moment, they stared at each other. Sarah's first coherent thought was that he was even more devastating up close than from a distance. Tall, easily 6 feet 3 inches, with shoulders that filled his custom suit perfectly. His skin was the color of aged whiskey, his eyes dark and intense beneath perfectly shaped brows. His jaw was strong, his lips full, and there was a small scar above his left eyebrow that somehow made him more attractive rather than less. He looked exhausted. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up, and there was a shadow of stubble on his jaw that suggested he'd been awake too long. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice deeper than she'd imagined. "I didn't realize anyone was in here. I was looking for—" He trailed off, his gaze moving past her to the windows, to the city spread out below like scattered diamonds. "Looking for?" Sarah prompted, finding her voice. "Honestly?" Quiet, space to think. He laughed, a sound without much humor. "I own this building, but I can't find a moment of peace in it." Sarah should have left, should have gathered her papers and excused herself and disappeared back into her comfortable invisibility. But something in his voice, a weariness, a vulnerability that didn't match the confident playboy she'd seen from a distance, made her pause. "The 95th floor isn't quiet enough?" she asked. His eyes focused on her with sudden intensity, and Sarah felt the full weight of his attention, like a physical thing. When was the last time someone had really looked at her? Not through her, not past her, but at her. "The 95th floor is full of people who want something from me," Apollo said. "Assistants who need decisions, executives who need approvals, women who need—" He stopped, seeming to catch himself. "Sorry, you don't need to hear my problems." "Everyone has problems," Sarah said quietly, "even people with beautiful offices." He smiled then, and it transformed his face. Not the practiced smile she'd seen him wear with his conquests. This was real, reaching his eyes, crinkling the corners. "You work here. I don't think I've seen you before." "Of course you haven't," Sarah thought. "I'm invisible to people like you." "Night shift," she said aloud. "Data analysis. We're the people who keep the company running while everyone else sleeps." "What's your name?" Sarah hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Giving him her name felt like handing over something precious, something dangerous. Sarah Mitchell. Apollo Sinclair. He extended his hand. Sarah stared at it. His hand was beautiful. Long fingers, neat nails, a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her car. Taking that hand would cross a line, would make her real to him, visible. But refusing would be stranger still. She shook his hand. His grip was warm, firm, and lasted just a moment longer than professional courtesy required. Sarah felt that handshake all the way up her arm, a warmth that spread through her chest like brandy. "What kind of data do you analyze?" Apollo asked, settling onto the edge of the conference table with an ease that suggested he was comfortable anywhere he chose to be. "Consumer trends, shopping patterns, market predictions." Sounds boring. Sarah smiled despite herself. It's not. Numbers tell stories if you know how to read them. They tell you what people want before they know they want it. They tell you who's lying and who's telling the truth. They tell you... She stopped, realizing she was saying too much. "Tell you what?" Apollo leaned forward, genuinely interested. "Everything. They tell you everything." He was quiet for a moment, studying her with those intense dark eyes. "You're good at it. Reading numbers." It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. "Yes." "Good enough to trace money through shell companies, through offshore accounts?" Sarah's blood turned to ice, but her face remained calm, her voice steady. "I imagine so if I had reason to." "Why?" Apollo stood, walking to the windows, his hands in his pockets. "Someone in this company just saved me from making a catastrophic mistake. Someone brilliant, someone who sees things other people miss." He turned to face her. "I'm trying to find them, to thank them." "Maybe they don't want to be thanked," Sarah said quietly. "Maybe they just wanted to help." Nobody does something for nothing. There's always a motive. Maybe their motive was just doing the right thing. Apollo laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You still believe people do things just because they're right? That's..." He paused, searching for words. "That's either naive or beautiful. I can't decide which." "Can't it be both?" He looked at her for a long moment, and Sarah felt something shift in the air between them. A recognition. A connection that had nothing to do with anonymous letters and everything to do with two people finding each other at 3 a.m. in an empty conference room. "What are you doing here so late, Mr. Sinclair?" Sarah asked, needing to break the intensity of his gaze. "Call me Apollo, and honestly, I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about that letter. About someone in my own company knowing me well enough to predict I'd make that mistake, caring enough to stop me." He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect styling. "Do you know what that feels like? To realize someone sees you better than you see yourself?" Sarah knew exactly what that felt like. She'd been seeing Apollo Sinclair clearly for 3 years while he walked past her like furniture. "Unsettling," she said softly. "Yes." He moved closer, and Sarah caught the scent of his cologne, something expensive and understated, with notes of cedar and bergamot. And intriguing, and... He stopped just a few feet from her. "And I can't stop wondering who they are, what they want, why they care." "Maybe you should stop wondering and just be grateful," Sarah suggested. "Gratitude requires a recipient. You can't thank a ghost." "Maybe ghosts prefer it that way." Apollo smiled again, that real smile that made him look younger, more human. "You're interesting, Sarah Mitchell. How have I worked in this building for 8 years and never noticed you?" "Because you only notice what glitters," Sarah thought. "Because I'm careful to shine only when no one's looking." "The night shift is a different world," she said instead. "We're the people who exist while you sleep. I should visit more often then." It was flirtation, casual and practiced. Sarah recognized it for what it was, the automatic charm of a man who'd spent years perfecting the art of attraction. But beneath it, she sensed something else: curiosity, loneliness, a hunger for something real in a world of beautiful facades. "You should get some sleep, Mr. Sinclair," Sarah said, deliberately using his formal name again, creating distance. "Even CEOs need rest." "Apollo," he corrected. "And maybe I will. This conversation was—" He seemed to search for the right word. "Unexpected. Thank you. For treating me like a person instead of a position, for talking to me like I'm just—" He shrugged. "Another human being who can't sleep." He walked to the door, then paused, looking back at her. "Sarah, can I ask you something?" Her heart hammered. "Yes." "Do you think the person who wrote that letter knows me, really knows me? Or did they just see a problem and solve it?" Sarah met his eyes. "I think," she said carefully, "that you don't have to know someone personally to see them clearly. Sometimes distance gives you better perspective than proximity." Apollo nodded slowly, as if considering this. "Good night, Sarah Mitchell." "Good night, Apollo." He left, and Sarah stood alone in the conference room, her hands trembling, her heart racing. She walked to the window and looked out at the city, watching the lights blur as tears she hadn't expected filled her eyes. She'd been invisible for so long, safe in her shadows, but in 10 minutes of conversation, Apollo Sinclair had seen her, not as the woman who'd saved him. He had no idea she was his mysterious guardian angel, but as a person, as someone worth talking to at 3 in the morning, and that was so much more dangerous than anything else. Sarah pressed her forehead against the cool glass. In the reflection, she could see herself, a black woman in simple clothes with careful eyes and a lifetime of practice at being overlooked. Behind her reflection, the city glittered with possibility and peril. She'd told herself she could stay invisible. That one anonymous letter wouldn't change anything, but she'd been lying. Everything had changed the moment Apollo Sinclair looked at her and saw a person instead of furniture. Everything had changed the moment she'd felt something crack in the armor she'd worn for so long, and the most dangerous truth of all, she wanted him to see her again. Far below, in the street, a car drove past with its headlights cutting through the darkness. Sarah watched it disappear around a corner, carrying its passengers to destinations unknown. She thought about trajectories and momentum and the mathematics of collision. Two objects in motion, previously on parallel paths, had just begun to curve toward each other. Physics was inevitable, gravity was relentless, and Sarah Mitchell, who'd made a career of calculating outcomes, couldn't calculate her way out of this. 95 floors above her, Apollo Sinclair stood in his office, staring at the white letter that had changed everything, wondering about ghosts and gratitude, and the woman with careful eyes who'd spoken to him like he was human. Neither of them could sleep, and somewhere in the mathematics of fate, in the invisible equations that govern collision and connection, the distance between them had just gotten measurably, inevitably smaller. Monday morning arrived with the kind of spring sunlight that made Manhattan look like it had been dipped in gold. Sarah should have been sleeping. After working all night Friday, all night Saturday, and all night Sunday, her body demanded rest, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Apollo Sinclair standing in that conference room, looking at her like she mattered. It was dangerous, stupid, a distraction she couldn't afford. So instead of sleeping, Sarah sat in her small Brooklyn apartment with its view of a brick wall, drinking coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and tried to convince herself that their conversation meant nothing. He'd been restless. She'd been there. That was all. Her phone buzzed at 11:37. An unknown number. "Hello? Miss Mitchell? This is Patricia Morrison, head of legal at Sinclair Corporation. Mr. Sinclair would like to see you in his office at 3 o'clock this afternoon. Can you make it? Sarah's coffee cup froze halfway to her lips. I work the night shift. Mr. Sinclair is aware. He's asking you to come in during the day. Just this once. It's important. Every instinct Sarah possessed screamed at her to refuse, to make an excuse, to protect the careful distance she'd maintained, but curiosity, and something deeper she didn't want to name, made her say, "I'll be there." "Excellent. 95th floor. Mr. Sinclair's assistant will be expecting you." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, her heart racing. Why would Apollo want to see her? Had he figured it out? Had some investigator traced the letter back to her despite all her precautions? Or was this something else entirely? She stood, walked to her closet, and stared at her limited wardrobe. Everything was practical, professional, designed to blend in, to be forgotten. She owned nothing that would look appropriate for the 95th floor, for the world of power and polish where Apollo lived. But she was who she was. And if Apollo Sinclair wanted to see her, he could see the real her. No pretense, no costume, no attempt to fit into his glamorous world. Sarah chose a simple black dress, the nicest thing she owned, paired it with a charcoal blazer, and pulled her hair back in its usual neat bun. In the mirror, she looked like exactly what she was, a woman who worked with numbers in the shadows, suddenly called into the light. The subway ride to Midtown took 43 minutes. Sarah spent them trying to prepare for every scenario: interrogation about the letter, questions about her background, a polite dismissal, a threat. She didn't prepare for what actually happened. Apollo's assistant, a polished woman in her 50s named Catherine, greeted Sarah at the elevator with a warmth that felt genuine. "Miss Mitchell, Mr. Sinclair is expecting you. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "I'm fine, thank you." Catherine led her down the hallway Sarah had walked in darkness just days ago. In daylight, the executive floor was even more intimidating, all that marble and mahogany and art that probably had insurance policies worth more than Sarah's life savings. Catherine knocked once on the oak door, then opened it. "Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Sinclair?" Sarah stepped into Apollo's office and her breath caught. The view. Dear God, the view. 2 walls of floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panorama of Manhattan that made her feel like she was floating above the city. The Hudson River glittered in the distance. Central Park spread out like an emerald jewel. And everywhere buildings reached toward a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Spectacular, isn't it? Sarah turned. Apollo stood beside his desk, jacket off, shirt sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than she'd seen him. In the conference room at 3 in the morning, he'd seemed vulnerable, searching. Now, in his own domain, he was all confidence again. But his smile was real. That same smile that reached his eyes. Sarah struggled for words. "It's like seeing the world from somewhere you're not supposed to be." Apollo laughed. "Perfect description. That's exactly what it feels like. Please, sit." He gestured to a seating area by the windows, a leather sofa and chairs arranged around a glass coffee table. Sarah sat, acutely aware of how out of place she felt in this space, her simple dress against his custom furniture, her worn shoes on his expensive rug. Apollo sat across from her, and Sarah noticed something she hadn't seen before. He looked tired. Not just physically exhausted, but emotionally worn. Like a man who'd been performing for too long and forgotten how to stop. "Thank you for coming," he said. "I know this interrupts your sleep schedule." "You said it was important." "It is." Apollo leaned forward, his forearms on his knees, his expression serious. "Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. My investigation into the person who sent me that letter has turned up 83 employees with the financial analysis skills to trace those accounts. but only 12 who work night shifts. And of those 12, only 3 have the advanced mathematics background to understand the kind of layered offshore structuring involved. Sarah's heart hammered, but she kept her face neutral. And you're one of those 3. But that's not why you're here. Then why am I here? Apollo stood, walked to his desk, and returned with a folder. He handed it to her. Open it. Sarah opened the folder. Inside were printouts of reports, her reports. Consumer trend analyses she'd written over the past 3 years, predictions about market shifts, statistical models forecasting shopping behaviors. I had someone pull all your work, Apollo said quietly. Every report you've written, every analysis you've submitted. Sarah, you're not just good at this. You're exceptional. Your prediction accuracy rate is 94%. The next best analyst in the company is at 78%. You see patterns that other people miss. You understand human behavior at a level that's... He shook his head. It's extraordinary. Sarah stared at the reports, feeling exposed. No one had ever looked at her work this closely. No one had ever cared. Why were you wasting your talent on consumer trends? Apollo asked. Why aren't you in financial analysis, corporate strategy? Why are you working night shifts analyzing shopping patterns when you could be... Because I wanted to be invisible, Sarah said quietly. The truth came out before she could stop it. Because I didn't want attention. I wanted a quiet job that paid my bills and left me alone. Apollo sat back, studying her with those intense eyes. Why? That's personal. Fair enough. He nodded, accepting her boundary without pushing. It was unexpected, this respect from a man she'd watched steamroll through boardrooms and bedrooms with equal confidence. Let me tell you why you're really here. I need someone I can trust, someone brilliant. Someone who sees things other people miss. I have a deal, a big one, that could expand Sinclair Corporation into 3 new markets. But after what happened with Singapore, I don't trust my usual team to vet it properly. You want me to analyze it? Sarah asked carefully. I want you to be my private consultant, just for this deal. I'll pay you triple your current salary for 3 months of work. You'll report directly to me. No one else needs to know what you're doing or why. You'll work whatever hours you prefer, day, night, it doesn't matter. And when it's done, if you want to go back to being invisible, I'll respect that. Sarah stared at him. Why me? You don't know me. I know your work. I know you're brilliant. And... Apollo paused, something shifting in his expression. I know that whoever wrote me that letter wanted nothing in return. They had power, the power of information, and they chose to give it away. I've been in business for 15 years, and I've never encountered that kind of integrity. It made me realize I've been surrounding myself with the wrong people. People who want something from me. People who see me as a means to an end. He met her eyes. You talked to me Friday night like I was just a person. Do you know how rare that is? Sarah felt something crack in her chest. Beneath the playboy exterior, beneath the confidence and the conquest, Apollo Sinclair was lonely. Desperately, profoundly lonely in a way that all his women and wealth couldn't touch. What's the deal? She asked. Relief flooded Apollo's face. You'll do it? I haven't decided yet. Tell me about the deal. Apollo grinned, and it transformed him again, made him look younger, almost boyish. He stood, grabbed a remote from his desk, and a screen descended from the ceiling. For the next hour, he walked Sarah through a proposal to acquire a chain of boutique hotels in Europe. Properties in Paris, Rome, Monaco, and the Swiss Alps. A portfolio worth $800 million. Sarah listened, watched, and absorbed. But more than the numbers and projections, she absorbed him. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about restoring historical properties. the passion in his voice when he described preserving European craftsmanship while modernizing amenities. The vulnerability when he admitted he'd always dreamed of owning a place in Paris. This wasn't the playboy she'd watched from a distance. This was someone who genuinely loved what he did, someone who saw beauty and potential, someone who cared about legacy, not just profit. "So," Apollo asked when he'd finished, "what do you think?" Sarah stood, walked to the windows, and looked out at Manhattan spread beneath them. She could feel Apollo behind her, waiting, and she knew this moment was a crossroads. Say yes, and step out of the shadows, step into his world. Risk everything she'd built to protect herself. Say no and stay safe, stay invisible, stay alone. "I'll need full access to all financial records," she heard herself say. "Complete transparency. No secrets, no hidden accounts, nothing held back." Done. "I'll need to contact the sellers directly. Ask questions your team might not think to ask. Whatever you need. And I work alone. No oversight, no interference. You hired me for my judgment. Trust it." Apollo walked to stand beside her at the window. This close, she could see the flecks of amber in his dark eyes, the precise line of his jaw, the way a small muscle ticked when he was concentrating. "Can I ask you something?" he said quietly. "Yes." "That night in the conference room, you said numbers tell you everything, tell you who's lying and who's telling the truth. When you look at my numbers, at my life, what do they tell you?" Sarah turned to face him fully. This close, she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth radiating from his body. This close, he wasn't just a distant star. He was devastatingly, dangerously real. "They tell me you're lonely," she said softly. "They tell me you fill your calendar so full there's no time to feel it. They tell me you collect women like art because beautiful things are easier than real things. They tell me you're searching for something you lost a long time ago, but you've forgotten what it is." Apollo's breath caught. For a long moment he just stared at her, and Sarah saw shock in his eyes. Shock and recognition and something that looked almost like relief. "How do you do that?" he whispered. "How do you see through me like I'm glass?" "Because I'm invisible," Sarah said, "and invisible people see everything. You're not invisible to me." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah's heart hammered so hard she was sure he could hear it. This was the moment to step back, to create distance, to remember all the reasons this couldn't happen, but she didn't step back. "Apollo!" The office door burst open. A woman swept in, and Sarah knew immediately who she was. Not from pictures, though she'd probably been photographed enough to fill magazines, but from the way she moved, like she owned every space she entered, like the world was her stage and everyone else was just audience. She was stunning. Skin like porcelain, hair like spun gold, wearing a white dress that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. And the way she looked at Apollo, possessive, hungry, familiar, made Sarah's stomach clench. "Darling," the woman purred, her voice carrying a hint of French accent. "I came as soon as I heard. You must have been devastated about Singapore. Thank God nothing happened." Apollo's entire body had gone rigid. "Isabelle, what are you doing here?" "What do you think?" "I came back for you." Isabelle's eyes flicked to Sarah for the first time, dismissing her in an instant. "Who's this?" "Sarah Mitchell, my new consultant." Apollo's voice was cold. "Sarah, this is Isabelle Laurent, my ex-fiancée." Ex-fiancée. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Of course Apollo had been engaged. Of course there was someone like this in his past. Someone beautiful and sophisticated and perfectly suited to his world of glass towers and glamorous parties. "Consultant?" Isabelle laughed, a sound like wind chimes, cold and pretty. "Apollo, darling, surely you're not working on a Monday afternoon. Send her away. We need to talk." "We have nothing to talk about," Apollo said. "You left, remember, 6 months ago. called off the wedding 3 weeks before the ceremony and flew back to Paris. I made a mistake. Isabelle moved closer to Apollo, her hand reaching for his arm. I was scared of commitment, scared of losing myself. But I've realized you're the only man who ever mattered, the only one I ever loved. I want to come back, Apollo. I want to try again. Sarah watched Apollo's face, trying to read his expression. Shock, anger, and beneath it, something else. Something that looked like old pain resurfacing. I should go, Sarah said quietly. No. Apollo's voice was sharp. Stay. Isabelle was just leaving. Was I? Isabelle's eyes hardened. Apollo, we were together for 3 years, engaged for 6 months. You loved me. You wanted to marry me. You can't just throw that away. You threw it away when you left. Apollo pulled his arm from her grip. You don't get to come back when it's convenient for you. I came back because I love you. You came back because you heard I almost lost everything in Singapore. You came back because you thought I needed saving. But I don't need you, Isabelle. I don't want you. We're done. Isabelle's perfect face contorted with anger. Don't be stupid, Apollo. We're perfect together. Everyone says so. You'll never find anyone better than me. That's where you're wrong, Apollo said quietly, and his eyes moved to Sarah. I've already found someone better. The room went silent. Sarah's heart stopped. He didn't mean, but Isabelle understood immediately. Her eyes narrowed as she looked at Sarah, really looked at her this time, taking in the simple dress, the lack of jewelry, the absence of designer labels. Her? Isabelle's voice dripped with contempt. Are you serious? Apollo, she's nobody. She's worth 10 of you, Apollo said, his voice like steel. And you need to leave, now. Isabelle's face flushed red. You'll regret this. You'll realize what you gave up, and I won't be waiting when you come crawling back. I'm counting on it. Isabelle turned and swept out of the office, slamming the door behind her with enough force to make the art on the walls tremble. Silence descended, thick and uncomfortable. Apollo, Sarah began, you shouldn't have said you're worth 10 of her. I meant it. Apollo ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect style. I'm sorry you had to witness that. Isabelle has perfect timing for dramatic entrances. You loved her. It wasn't a question, but Apollo answered anyway. I thought I did, but I loved the idea of her more than the reality. She fit my life perfectly. She looked right on my arm. Everyone approved. My mother adored her. My business associates thought she was the perfect CEO's wife. He laughed bitterly, but she never saw me, not really. She saw what I could give her, the lifestyle, the status, the pretty picture we made together. Sarah understood that in her bones. Being seen for what you could provide instead of who you were. When she left, Apollo continued quietly, I thought I was heartbroken. Spent weeks angry and hurt and questioning everything. But you know what I realized? I was more relieved than devastated, because pretending all the time is exhausting. Pretending to be what someone wants you to be. Pretending that perfect pictures are the same as real connection. He walked back to the windows, staring out at the city. That's why I collect women now. Why I don't let anyone close, because at least with them, there's no pretense. They want an experience. I provide it. No one gets hurt because no one's expecting more than one night. That sounds lonely, Sarah said softly. It is. Apollo turned to face her. But it's honest, and I'd rather be lonely than pretend again. He paused. Until Friday night. Until I talked to someone who didn't want anything from me except conversation, someone who treated me like I was just a man who couldn't sleep instead of a trophy to collect. Apollo. I know this is complicated. I know I just met you. I know you have your own reasons for staying invisible, but Sarah, when I look at you, I don't see nobody. I see someone real, someone brilliant, someone who might actually see me too." Sarah's hands were trembling. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to protect herself, to not fall for the lonely vulnerability of a man who lived in a world so different from hers they might as well be on different planets. But when she looked at Apollo standing there, stripped of his playboy armor, just a man asking to be seen, she couldn't run. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? Okay, I'll consult on your European deal. I'll work with you. But Apollo—" She met his eyes. "I can't be your next conquest. I can't be the next woman you collect because she makes you feel something for a moment before you move on. That's not what this is." "Then what is it?" Apollo crossed the space between them in 3 strides. He stood so close, Sarah had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, close enough that she could see the pulse beating in his throat, the slight tremor in his hands that suggested he was as affected as she was. "It's 2 people who've been invisible in different ways," he said quietly. "You hide in shadows. I hide in spotlights. But maybe we see each other clearly enough to stop hiding." Sarah couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Could only feel the pull between them, gravity and inevitability and danger all wrapped together. "This is a terrible idea," she whispered. "The worst," Apollo agreed. "We barely know each other." "True. You have an ex-fiancée who just declared war. She'll get over it. And I have secrets, things in my past that—" Apollo placed one finger gently over her lips, silencing her. "We all have pasts, Sarah. I don't care about yours. I care about now. About this. About finding someone who sees me and doesn't run away. I should run away. But you're not going to, are you?" Sarah looked into his eyes and saw her own loneliness reflected back. 2 people who'd spent so long protecting themselves, they'd forgotten what it felt like to be vulnerable, what it felt like to be real. "No," she breathed. "God help me, I'm not." Apollo smiled, and this time the smile was full of relief and hope, and something that looked dangerously like joy. "Then let's make a deal, Sarah Mitchell. You help me with my European hotels, and I'll help you step out of the shadows, just a little, just enough to remember what sunlight feels like. And if it goes wrong, if this blows up, then at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have been real with someone, even if just for a little while." Sarah knew she should say no. Knew she should protect herself. Knew this man, this beautiful, wounded, complicated man, could destroy everything she'd carefully built. But looking into Apollo Sinclair's eyes, seeing him really see her, she couldn't remember why safety had ever seemed more important than this. "Deal," she whispered. Apollo's smile could have lit the entire city. Neither of them noticed Isabelle Laurent standing in the hallway beyond the closed door, her phone in her hand, her perfect face twisted with fury. Neither of them knew that while they were making deals and promises and taking the first dangerous steps toward each other, someone was already plotting to tear them apart. But in that moment, in Apollo's office with Manhattan spread beneath them like a promise, Sarah Mitchell and Apollo Sinclair chose each other, chose risk over safety, chose possibility over protection. And sometimes that's all love requires. One moment of courage, one choice to be seen. Everything else is just consequences. The European deal consumed Sarah's days and invaded her dreams. For 3 weeks, she lived in a strange twilight existence, sleeping in scattered intervals, working through mountains of financial documents, and spending hours in Apollo's office as they dissected every aspect of the hotel acquisition. The properties were legitimate, the sellers were transparent, but something nagged at Sarah, a dissonance in the numbers she couldn't quite name. "You're frowning," Apollo observed one evening. They were alone in his office, the city dark beyond the windows, spreadsheets covering every surface. "You've been frowning at those Monaco property records for 20 minutes. Sarah looked up. Apollo had shed his jacket hours ago, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his tie discarded. He looked more human this way, less like the polished CEO and more like the man she'd met in that conference room, the man who couldn't sleep, the man who was lonely. "The Monaco Hotel," Sarah said slowly. "The valuation is correct. The revenue streams make sense. The property history is clean, but the timing is too perfect. The owner is selling just as Monaco property values are about to spike. There's a new development coming, luxury condos, a marina expansion. This hotel will be worth 40% more in 18 months. Apollo leaned back in his chair. "So we're getting a good deal. That's good, isn't it?" "It's suspicious. Why would a savvy property owner sell right before a major value increase? Unless—" Sarah pulled up another screen, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Unless they know something we don't." She worked in silence for 15 minutes, tracing permits, zoning changes, city council meetings. Apollo watched her, and Sarah felt the weight of his attention like sunlight on her skin. She'd grown accustomed to it over the past 3 weeks, this sense of being seen. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. "There," she breathed, "the marina expansion. It's being challenged by environmental groups. The development might not happen, and if it doesn't, the property value stays flat. We're not getting a deal. We're getting exactly what it's worth." Apollo stood, coming to look over her shoulder at her screen. This close, she could smell his cologne, feel the warmth of his body. "How did you find that?" "City Council minutes. Meeting notes from environmental impact assessments. They're public record if you know where to look. And you know where to look. I always know where to look." Sarah turned her head and found Apollo's face inches from hers. Her breath caught. For 3 weeks, they'd maintained a careful professionalism, working together, yes, growing comfortable with each other, certainly, but never crossing the invisible line they'd drawn that day in his office. Never acknowledging the electricity that sparked between them whenever they were alone. Now, with Apollo so close she could count his eyelashes, that line felt dangerously thin. "Sarah," Apollo said softly, "can I ask you something personal?" "That depends on the question. Why data analysis? Why hide in numbers when you could be—" He gestured vaguely. "Anything. Everything. You're brilliant. You could run your own company, build your own empire. Why make yourself small?" Sarah stood, needing distance. She walked to the windows, pressing her palm against the cool glass. Below, the city glittered with 1,000,000 lives, 1,000,000 stories, most of them invisible to people like Apollo. "I was married once," she said quietly. The words came out before she could stop them. "Young, 19, to a man who saw my intelligence as something to control, not celebrate. He liked me small, quiet, manageable." She felt Apollo move behind her, but he didn't touch her, just listened. "I worked for his company, used my skills to build his empire while he took the credit. And when I finally realized what he was doing, using my analysis to manipulate stock prices, to insider trade, to commit fraud, and threatened to report him." Sarah's voice hardened. "He destroyed me, framed me for the crimes. I went to prison for 18 months for things he did." Apollo's sharp intake of breath echoed in the quiet office. "When I got out," Sarah continued, "I had a record. No one would hire me. No one trusted me. Apollo Sinclair was the first person in 3 years who looked at my work instead of my past. Your HR department gave me a chance when no one else would." She turned to face him. "So yes, I make myself small, because I learned that being visible means being vulnerable, and I've been hurt enough." Apollo's face showed shock, anger, compassion, emotions cycling through so fast Sarah couldn't track them all. "Your husband, ex-husband, James Mitchell, He's in Silicon Valley now, running a tech company worth billions. My contributions erased from history, my name attached to crimes I didn't commit. Sarah, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. No one does. That's the point. She wrapped her arms around herself. I rebuilt my life in shadows because shadows are safe. Being invisible means no one can hurt you, no one can use you, no one can destroy you again. Apollo closed the distance between them, slowly, giving her time to move away if she wanted. But Sarah didn't move. She let him come close, let him gently take her hands in his. I see you, he said quietly, and I would never hurt you, never use you, never destroy the incredible woman you are. You can't promise that. People always, I can promise that I'll try, that I'll respect you, that I'll see your brilliance and celebrate it, not control it. His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. Sarah, what happened to you was evil. Your ex-husband was a coward who stole your achievements and your freedom, but don't let him steal your future too. Tears burned behind Sarah's eyes. When was the last time someone had defended her, believed her, seen her pain and validated it instead of questioning it? I'm scared, she whispered, of me, of this, of feeling, of wanting something I might lose. Apollo raised one hand to cup her face, his touch impossibly gentle. I'm scared too. I've spent 6 months keeping everyone at arm's length because Isabelle taught me that letting people close means giving them power to leave. But Sarah, his voice roughened with emotion, you make me want to risk it. You make me want to try being real instead of protected. Apollo. The office door burst open for the second time in 3 weeks. But this time, it wasn't Isabelle. Marcus Chen, Apollo's CFO, stood in the doorway, his face pale. Behind him, James Rodriguez, head of security, looked grim. Apollo dropped his hands, stepping back from Sarah. Professional distance restored instantly. Marcus, what's wrong? We have a problem. Marcus held up a tablet. A big one. Someone leaked the European hotel deal to the press. Every detail, the properties, the price, the timeline. And they've framed it as Apollo Sinclair's desperate attempt to recover from the Singapore disaster. Sarah's blood ran cold. That's not all, James added. The leak came from inside the company, from someone with access to confidential deal files. Apollo's jaw tightened. How many people have that access? 7. You, me, Marcus, Patricia Morrison. James's eyes flicked to Sarah. And your new consultant. The implication hung in the air like poison. Apollo's voice turned to ice. If you're suggesting that, Sarah, I'm not suggesting anything. I'm stating facts. Ms. Mitchell has been working alone, with full access to all deal documents for 3 weeks. She's the newest person on the team, and according to her background check, she has a criminal record for— Get out! Apollo's voice was lethal. Both of you, now. Apollo, we need to investigate. I said get out. Marcus and James exchanged looks but obeyed. The door closed behind them, with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot in the sudden silence. Sarah stood frozen, her worst nightmare materializing before her eyes. The past she'd tried to bury rising up to destroy her present. Again. Sarah. Apollo's voice was careful, controlled. Tell me you didn't leak those documents. I didn't. Tell me you're not working for a competitor, or your ex-husband. Or Apollo, I would never. Then who? He spun to face her, and Sarah saw doubt in his eyes. Just a flicker, just a shadow. But it was there. Who else has access? Who else knows every detail of this deal? Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities, then froze on one horrifying answer. Isabelle, she breathed. What? That day she came here. She was in your office for, 10 minutes before I arrived. Does she know your computer password, your files? Apollo's face went white. Yes. We were engaged. She had access to everything, but she wouldn't she? Sarah pulled out her phone, searching frantically. Think about it. She comes back wanting to reconcile. You reject her. She sees you with me, sees you interested in someone else. What better revenge than destroying your new deal and framing your new consultant? Apollo grabbed his own phone, barking orders. James, get back in here. Pull security footage from my office from 3 weeks ago. The day Isabelle showed up, I want to know everywhere she went, everything she touched. 20 minutes later, they had their answer. The security footage showed Isabelle, left alone in Apollo's office for 4 minutes, while he was in the hallway arguing with James about some unrelated matter. 4 minutes during which she'd accessed Apollo's computer, the password written on a sticky note under his keyboard, a security flaw he'd never bothered to fix, and copied files to a thumb drive she'd concealed in her designer purse. That bitch, Apollo breathed, staring at the screen. She must have waited, Sarah said, her analytical mind piecing it together. Waited until we were deep into the deal, waited until the leak would cause maximum damage. She turned to Apollo. And framed me because she knew you'd be most hurt by losing someone you'd started to trust. Apollo's hands clenched into fists. I'll destroy her. I'll sue her for corporate espionage. No. Sarah placed a hand on his arm. That's what she wants. Public drama, your attention, proof that she still matters to you. Then what? Sarah smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd learned to fight from the shadows. We let her think she won. We let the press speculate. Meanwhile, I'll find proof of her involvement, digital fingerprints she left on those files, metadata from the leak, something concrete. And when we have it, we don't sue. We give it to the FBI. Corporate espionage is a federal crime. Apollo stared at her, something like awe crossing his face. You're terrifying when you're strategic. I learned from the best. James Mitchell taught me how the game is played. I just never wanted to play it. Sarah's smile faded. But for you, to protect what we're building, I'll play. What are we building, Sarah? Apollo asked quietly. Because 3 weeks ago, this was a business arrangement. But now it's more. Sarah stepped closer, placing her palm against his chest, feeling his heart hammer beneath her hand. Now it's dangerous and complicated and probably stupid, but it's real, and I haven't felt real in a very long time. Apollo covered her hand with his. I want this. Us. Whatever this becomes. But I need you to know, when Isabelle came in today, when Marcus suggested you might have leaked those files, for just a second, I doubted, and I hate that I doubted. But after Isabelle, after being betrayed, I know, Sarah interrupted gently. I doubted too. Wondered if this was just another powerful man who'd use me and discard me. But Apollo, we both have damage. We both have reasons to protect ourselves. The question is, do we let our damage destroy this, or do we work through it? Apollo pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. Sarah melted into the embrace, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. We work through it, he murmured into her hair, together. They stood like that for a long moment, two damaged people choosing to risk healing together. When they finally pulled apart, Apollo's expression had hardened into determination. We need to move fast. If Isabelle leaked this deal, she's probably planning more. We need to... Sarah's phone buzzed. An unknown number. Again, she answered. Hello? Ms. Mitchell, a woman's voice, professional but urgent. This is Agent Jennifer Walsh with the FBI's White Collar Crimes Division. We need to speak with you immediately about your former husband, James Mitchell. We believe he's committing securities fraud, and we understand you might have information that could help our investigation. Sarah's world tilted. She looked at Apollo, saw concern in his eyes. When? She asked. Tonight, if possible. This is time-sensitive. Sarah closed her eyes. The past she'd tried to escape was calling her back. But this time, maybe she could finally get justice. Finally clear her name. "I'll be there," she said. When she hung up, Apollo was watching her. "Your ex-husband? The FBI thinks he's committing fraud. They want my help." Sarah laughed bitterly. "Ironic, isn't it? The man who framed me for fraud is now actually committing it. Do you want me to come with you?" The offer touched something deep in Sarah's chest. "You would do that?" "Sarah, 3 weeks ago I hired you to analyze a business deal. But now?" Apollo took her hands. "Now you're not my consultant. You're not my employee. You're someone I care about, someone I'm falling for, and I don't let people I care about face their demons alone." Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "I'm falling for you too, and it terrifies me." "Good," Apollo said, smiling, "because safety is overrated. Being terrified means we're alive, means we're feeling, means we're finally stepping out of our respective hiding places." Sarah kissed him then, couldn't help herself. Rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his, pouring 3 weeks of longing and fear and hope into that kiss. Apollo responded immediately, his arms coming around her, lifting her closer, kissing her back with a hunger that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Apollo rested his forehead against hers. "We're really doing this," he whispered, "aren't we?" "Apparently," Sarah breathed back. "God help us both." Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered in the darkness. Inside Apollo's office, 2 people who'd spent years protecting themselves from pain chose something braver. They chose each other. And somewhere in the city, Isabelle Laurent saw the leaked story hit the internet and smiled, not knowing her revenge would be short-lived. Somewhere in Silicon Valley, James Mitchell continued his fraudulent empire, not knowing his past was about to catch up with him. And somewhere in the complex mathematics of fate, the trajectories of 4 damaged people were converging toward a collision that would change everything. But in that moment, Sarah Mitchell and Apollo Sinclair had each other. And that was enough. The FBI field office in Lower Manhattan was nothing like Sarah expected. No dramatic interrogation rooms or 2-way mirrors like in movies. Just a bland conference room with grey walls, fluorescent lights, and terrible coffee. Agent Jennifer Walsh was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She sat across from Sarah and Apollo. He'd insisted on coming, and Sarah had been too grateful to refuse, with a stack of folders that looked ominously thick. "Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming on such short notice." Agent Walsh opened the top folder. "We've been investigating James Mitchell for 8 months. Securities fraud, market manipulation, insider trading. The same crimes you were convicted of 5 years ago." Sarah's throat tightened. "I didn't commit those crimes. He framed me." "We know." Agent Walsh slid a document across the table. "We've reviewed your case. The evidence against you was circumstantial at best. You should never have been convicted, but James Mitchell is very good at covering his tracks and directing blame elsewhere." Apollo's hand found Sarah's under the table, squeezing gently. "We believe he's escalating," Agent Walsh continued. "His current scheme involves artificially inflating his company's stock value through false earnings reports and insider information leaks. He's about to make approximately $300 million through stock options he plans to exercise next month." "What do you need from me?" Sarah asked. "Information. You worked closely with him. You know his patterns, his methods, how he structures his fraudulent transactions." Agent Walsh leaned forward. "But more than that, we need you to help us prove it. We need someone who understands his financial footprint well enough to trace what he's hidden." Sarah felt something shift inside her. For 5 years, she'd lived with the weight of crimes she didn't commit. 5 years of shame and fear and hiding. Now, finally, a chance to fight back. "I'll help," she said. "Whatever you need." Apollo's grip on her hand tightened. Agent Walsh smiled. "There's one more thing. We've discovered something interesting. James Mitchell has been making large payments, $50,000 monthly, to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. The account belongs to a woman named Isabelle Laurent." Sarah's head snapped up. "What? You know her?" "She's Apollo's ex-fiancée. She just leaked confidential information about his European hotel deal." Sarah's mind raced, connecting pieces. "How long has Mitchell been paying her?" 18 months. "Since before she got engaged to you, Mr. Sinclair." Apollo's face had gone pale. "Are you saying Isabelle was working with Sarah's ex-husband? That our entire relationship was—" "We don't know yet," Agent Walsh admitted, "but it's suspicious. We're investigating whether Mitchell placed Isabelle in your orbit deliberately, whether her engagement to you was designed to gather intelligence about Sinclair Corporation." Sarah felt sick. The implications were staggering. If James had orchestrated Isabelle's relationship with Apollo, then everything, the engagement, the betrayal, even Isabelle's recent return, could be part of some larger manipulation. "What would Mitchell gain from corporate intelligence about my company?" Apollo asked, his voice tight. "Market advantage. If he knows your business moves before they're public, he can trade on that information, make strategic investments, undermine your deals." Agent Walsh pulled out another document. "We found evidence that Mitchell shorted Sinclair Corporation stock right before your Singapore deal collapsed. Someone told him it would fail." "Isabelle," Sarah breathed. "She must have known Apollo was considering that deal. Fed the information to Mitchell. And when Apollo avoided that disaster, probably thanks to you, Ms. Mitchell, Mitchell needed another angle." Agent Walsh looked at Apollo. "The European hotel leak wasn't just Isabelle's revenge. It was Mitchell's attempt to manipulate your stock price again." Apollo stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Sarah watched tension radiate through his shoulders, his hands clenched at his sides. "Mr. Sinclair," Agent Walsh said quietly, "we need your cooperation. We need access to Sinclair Corporation's communications with Isabelle Laurent. Email, phone records, anything that might prove coordination with Mitchell." "You'll have everything," Apollo said without turning around. "Every email, every text message, every recorded phone call. I want them both destroyed." Sarah stood, crossing to Apollo. She placed a hand on his back, feeling the rigid muscles beneath his shirt. "We'll get through this." He turned to face her, and the pain in his eyes made her chest ache. "She pretended to love me for 18 months, agreed to marry me, all while working for your ex-husband." "How could I not see it?" "Because you wanted to believe someone could love you without an agenda," Sarah said softly. "That's not a weakness, Apollo. That's hope." Agent Walsh cleared her throat diplomatically. "If you two need a moment—" "No." Apollo straightened, his CEO mask sliding back into place. "What else do you need?" They spent the next 3 hours going through documents, timelines, evidence. Sarah's analytical mind absorbed it all, seeing the patterns, understanding the scheme. James had always been brilliant. That's what made him dangerous. But brilliant people left patterns, and Sarah knew how to read them. By the time they left the FBI office, it was past midnight. The city was quieter now. The usual Manhattan chaos dialed down to a steady hum. Apollo's driver waited at the curb, but Apollo waved him off. "Let's walk." They walked in silence for several blocks, the autumn air crisp against Sarah's face. Finally, Apollo spoke. "I spent 6 months thinking I was heartbroken over Isabelle. 6 months believing she was the love of my life who got away." He laughed bitterly. Turns out she never existed. The woman I loved was just a character she played. I know how that feels, Sarah said. James made me believe he loved me too, made me feel special, seen, then used everything I gave him to build his empire and destroy my life. Apollo stopped walking, pulling Sarah into a small park off the main street. They sat on a bench beneath trees whose leaves glowed amber under the streetlights. "How do you trust again after that?" Apollo asked. "How do you open yourself up when you've been so completely deceived?" Sarah took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "You choose to. Despite the fear, despite the damage, you meet someone who makes you want to risk it anyway." Apollo's eyes searched hers in the dim light. "Is that what I am? Your risk?" "Yes. And I'm terrified. Every time I start to feel something real for you, part of me screams to run, to protect myself, to stay safe in the shadows." Sarah squeezed his hand. "But then I remember how you see me, really see me, how you believed in me when you had every reason to doubt, how you've never once made me feel like I need to be anything other than exactly who I am." "You're extraordinary exactly as you are," Apollo said fiercely. "Your intelligence, your strength, your ability to survive and rebuild. Sarah, you're the most impressive person I've ever met. I don't want you to be anything else." Sarah felt tears burn her eyes. "I think I'm falling in love with you, and it terrifies me more than anything ever has." Apollo cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away the tears that had started to fall. "I'm already in love with you. Have been since that night in the conference room when you talked to me like I was human, when you saw through all my armor to the lonely man underneath. Apollo, I know it's fast. I know we're both damaged. I know we have your ex-husband and my ex-fiancé plotting against us, and FBI investigations and corporate espionage." Apollo smiled, that real smile that transformed his face. "But I also know that I've never felt with anyone what I feel with you. This sense of being completely seen and completely accepted, this feeling that I could show you all my flaws and failures and you'd still be here." "I will be here," Sarah whispered, "even when it's hard, even when we're scared." Apollo kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, not the passionate kiss from his office, but something deeper, a kiss that felt like a vow. When they pulled apart, Apollo rested his forehead against hers. "Move in with me." Sarah pulled back, startled. "What?" "Move in with me, not because it's practical or convenient, because I want to wake up next to you. I want to learn how you take your coffee and what you read before bed. I want to build something real with you, Sarah, starting now." "That's crazy. We've only known each other 3 weeks. And I've learned more about myself in these 3 weeks than in the past 3 years. You make me want to be better, real instead of protected, vulnerable instead of perfect." Apollo took both her hands. "I know you're scared, I'm scared too. But let's be scared together in a home instead of separately in our hiding places." Sarah's heart hammered. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was too fast, too risky, too much. But the part of her heart that had been hidden for so long, the part that craved connection and love and being seen, was louder. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Yes, I'll move in with you." Apollo's smile could have lit the entire city. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight, and Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. Something that had been clenched tight for 5 years finally began to unfold. They sat on that park bench for another hour, talking about logistics and fears and hopes, about how they'd handle the FBI investigation and Isabelle's schemes, about what it meant to build a life together when they were both still learning how to be vulnerable. Finally, as the first hints of dawn began to paint the sky, Apollo stood and offered Sarah his hand. "Come home with me," he said simply. Sarah took his hand and let him pull her to her feet. Apollo's penthouse was everything Sarah expected, and nothing like she imagined. Yes, there was the mandatory luxury, floor-to-ceiling windows with views that made her breath catch, furniture that probably cost more than her yearly salary, art that belonged in museums. But there were also unexpected touches. Bookshelves stuffed with worn paperbacks, a vinyl record collection that suggested Apollo actually listened to music, not just displayed it. A kitchen that looked used, not just decorative. Photos on the mantel, not professional shots, but casual snapshots of Apollo with what must be his family. "It's more human than I expected," Sarah said. Apollo laughed, pulling her close. "What did you expect? A cold minimalist showcase?" "Maybe a little. I save the showcasing for the office. Home is supposed to be," he gestured around, "real." They ordered takeout at dawn, dumplings from a place Apollo swore made the best in Manhattan. They ate sitting on his living room floor, watching the sun rise over the city, talking about everything and nothing. Sarah told him about her childhood in Detroit, her mother who cleaned houses to send her to college, her natural gift for mathematics that had felt like a superpower until James Mitchell turned it into a weapon. Apollo told her about growing up in Connecticut, the son of a single mother who'd worked 3 jobs to give him opportunities, about building his first company at 23 and nearly losing everything at 25. About the loneliness of success when you have no one to share it with. "I always thought I needed someone who fit my world," Apollo said, reaching for Sarah's hand. "Someone polished and perfect and impressive. But what I actually needed was someone real. Someone who challenges me to be better instead of just looking better." "I'm not perfect," Sarah warned. "I have nightmares about prison. I have trust issues. Sometimes I'll need space to hide in my numbers because people overwhelm me. And I'm commitment phobic after Isabelle. I'll probably panic occasionally and push you away. I work too much and don't always know how to express emotions like a functional human being." Apollo kissed her knuckles. "We'll be imperfect together." Sarah leaned against him, feeling safe in a way she hadn't in years. "What happens now, with the FBI investigation?" "Now we help them build their case. We take down your ex-husband and my ex-fiancé. We protect what we're building together." Apollo's voice hardened. "And we show them that the people they tried to destroy are stronger than they ever imagined." I like the sound of that. They fell asleep on Apollo's couch as dawn turned to morning, wrapped around each other, exhausted and hopeful, and ready to face whatever came next. 2 weeks later, Sarah stood in Apollo's, their bedroom, packing the last boxes from her Brooklyn apartment. Her phone rang. Agent Walsh. "Ms. Mitchell, we have James Mitchell in custody. Multiple counts of securities fraud, market manipulation, insider trading. The evidence you helped us gather was crucial. He's looking at 15 to 20 years. Sarah's knees went weak. Apollo appeared in the doorway, reading her expression, and crossed the room to hold her. "And Isabelle?" Sarah asked. "Also arrested. Corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit securities fraud. She'll serve time too." Agent Walsh paused. "Ms. Mitchell, the U.S. Attorney's Office is reviewing your original conviction. Given the evidence of Mitchell's pattern of framing others, they're prepared to vacate your conviction and clear your record entirely." Sarah couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. 5 years of carrying that weight, that shame, that criminal record, gone. "Thank you," she finally whispered. After she hung up, Apollo held her while she cried, not from sadness, but from relief, from freedom, from the overwhelming sense that justice, after so long, had finally arrived. "It's over," Apollo murmured into her hair. "They can't hurt you anymore." Sarah pulled back, looking up at him through tears. "I got so used to hiding, to being invisible. I don't know how to be seen anymore." "You learn," Apollo said, smiling, "one day at a time, with someone who loves you reminding you that you're worth seeing." "You love me?" Sarah asked, even though he'd said it before. She needed to hear it again. "I love you," Apollo confirmed. "Your brilliance, your strength, your ability to save me from my own blind spots." He kissed her softly. "My beautiful, invisible woman, who stepped out of the shadows and changed my entire world." Sarah kissed him back, pouring 5 years of pain and hope and healing into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, she said, "I love you too. My lonely king who only saw what glittered until I showed you that some things shine brighter in darkness." They stood in the bedroom of their shared home, 2 damaged people who'd found each other across chasms of class and circumstance and pain, who'd chosen love over safety, who'd chosen to be visible to each other when the world had taught them both to hide. Outside the windows, Manhattan glittered with possibility. Inside, Sarah Mitchell and Apollo Sinclair built something neither had believed possible, a love that saw clearly in light and darkness both. A love that proved the truth Sarah had known all along. The most important things aren't always visible. They're felt, chosen, built one brave moment at a time. And sometimes the invisible woman and the lonely king find each other in the shadows and discover that together they can finally step into the light.